Hi, everyone. We're really excited that you're here with us today. We're going to give everyone a couple of minutes to continue showing up. I see that some people are here and saying hi, but I'll start with a little background of why we're doing this. So I got my first in-house SEO position maybe like 13, 14 years ago. And what I did was my very first day, I'd gotten this job. I'd gotten through the interview and I Googled, what does an in-house SEO do? Because I knew how to be a not in-house SEO, an agency SEO or hacker SEO, whatever the not version of in-house SEO is. But I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I didn't know like how to put together roadmaps and do different things and kind of do SEO slower and explain it to people that didn't really get SEO. So I Googled and I found a post that may still be live, but it was many years ago. It was on Search Engine Journal, Search Engine Land, Search Engine Watch, any of the great websites that produce SEO content. And it wasn't that helpful because it was written by someone probably looking to promote themselves. I don't remember. I just remember reading this post and being like, okay, now I'm screwed because I found a post and it doesn't tell me anything to do. So the reason we're doing this today is because there are a lot of people doing in-house SEO. And I'm fortunate that I work with some amazing companies as a consultant, helping them to do in-house SEO. And a lot of people that do this are sort of learning as they go along. And we put together a great panel of experts. I know all of these panelists very, very well. Stewart, I was fortunate to have on my team for a couple of years at SurveyMonkey. And he motivated me to write the book that I'm releasing next week, Product Led SEO. He literally motivated me. Actually, there were things that I would, tell him. He'd say, "How do we explain this to the CEO? How do we do forecasting? How do we do it?" And some of the other things that Upasna and Jackie are going to talk about. And I would tell him, and I'd write it in an email, and he'd be like, "You should write a book about that." So it ended up being a book, and I'm really excited to launch this next week. For everyone that wants to pre-order, it is live on Amazon. I'd greatly appreciate it if you would not buy it on Amazon today, but buy it on Amazon on Tuesday. So maybe I can have a bestseller out of this. Bestseller in the SEO category. It matters to my parents, but hopefully to other people too. So I published this book on it, which hopefully guides more around in-house SEO. It's not a tactical SEO book. And as you're going to hear from the panels today, in-house SEO is not about tactics. It's about strategy and explanation. And really, I think if you had to sum up what in-house SEO is and how it's different from agency or out-of-house SEO or whatever the opposite is, in-house SEO is really all about the long game. Like, how do you continue to do things and how do you think in many quarters and how do you think about SEO as a career rather than SEO as a win? Like, what are you going to do today and how are you going to get one position today? So we have some great panelists. I'm going to turn it over to our first panelist in a moment, but I'll say a couple words about each one. So like I said, Stewart was on my team at SurveyMonkey. I was privileged to work with him for a couple of years. He has amazing knowledge. He, aside from working with me at SurveyMonkey, he worked at some really great companies, and now he's at Workato, and he has amazing knowledge about how to get things done within a company. And he's going to share that today. Jackie, I think I knew you. Even prior to your first Uber gig, you were at Square, from the Bay Area search meetups. Jackie has the things that she shares on Twitter and when she publishes blog posts, it's amazing. She really has a wealth of knowledge around being successful at SEO. And that's what we want to share today. And that's why we're having this exclusive webinar. And Upasna, I was privileged to share a couple stages with her. And again, she has so much wisdom on in-house, but it's not SEO. She has really transitioned over to the way I think of SEO and to the way many of you should think about SEO from a product management standpoint. Because again, it's not about the small wins. It's about growth and about driving in the direction of a company. And I can't promise you, because people are going to take me up on this, but I'm almost promising you that by the end of this hour, your minds will be blown and you'll have so much new knowledge and you'll have so many questions. And thank you to Semrush for hosting this, and they're going to share contact information. And this hour doesn't end this journey. You should get in touch with us and ask any follow-up questions, and don't be stuck in figuring out how to do in-house SEO if that is your current job or if that's the job you want to do. And of course, go buy my book on Tuesday. So with that, I'll turn it over to Stewart.
Thank you, Eli. And yes, go buy Eli's book on Tuesday, please. I've got an advanced copy, and yes, I did bother him often to write it, so I'm glad that he did, and congratulations, Eli. So yeah, let's talk about real-world in-house SEO. And I know that that Eli mentioned, like it's not about tactics, but I'm going to sort of take a step back from that and say it is kind of about tactics, but it's how the tactics sort of nest up to a broader strategy of how you're going to get more and more buy-in. So this is sort of typically what I've seen. A lot of this is from personal experience, and some of it is hearsay. I will neither confirm nor deny where I've learned any of this, but I have learned all of this. So that being said, so what tends to happen is you make your case, right? You make your broad SEO case for why SEO matters. Maybe you come into a position where SEO already matters. They're looking to bring someone in-house, maybe even to lead a team, or maybe just to join the team. But generally, you're going to find that, okay, if you've made a decent enough case, and by that I mean you've made a case where you've tied the average GA session or click, whichever you prefer, probably both, to the dollar value that is earned through the organic channel, it's going to be great. You're going to have buy-in, at least you're going to have prima facie buy-in. You're going to have, especially at the executive level or for C-suite, the C-suite, you're going to find people say, yes, we're all on board. We see the value of organic. It's our biggest driver of traffic. It's the biggest source of revenue. And that seems great. So you've got it, mission accomplished. But that doesn't mean that you necessarily have buy-in. That is to say, you won't, I've typically found you won't have buy-in across the board and with all of the stakeholders involved with what you need to get done in terms of SEO. So generally, I've seen that, well, lack of a better word, that the tension or the friction, or maybe even the perceived lack of value around SEO or organic, usually coming from engineering or development teams. Not always, but in general, that tends to happen. And so you've got top-down buy-in in terms of why SEO matters. That's great. That doesn't always trickle down to getting stuff done and implementing the tactics and your strategy that you need to really get off the ground. So what do you do when you are faced with a lack of support cross-functionally and from stakeholders that you need, that are sort of the linchpin for a lot of the strategy and tactics that you want to drive? So I always sort of encourage SEOs in-house to sort of think of what can you control directly. And again, CMS access is your golden ticket. If you've got CMS access in any capacity, or you can get it without sort of setting off the alarms, so to speak, that's going to be your biggest sort of lever for driving SEO. Again, your SEO strategy and tactics. And then also think about or consider any sort of outside resourcing that you may have in terms of support for in-house. Often you'll have agencies, some of them for the most part will be paid, but some of them will have sort of organic channels or back channels that you might be able to leverage. And then also consider other internal teams that have access to SEO related elements. Like there may be a team that has access to analytics and can get you some, again, into the tagging structure at least, or they may have CMS access where you directly don't have it. And so that might be your way in. And so once you sort of assess how you're going to sort of maneuver within this in-house experience, you really need, I can't stress this enough, you really need to prioritize actionable and meaningful tactics. And by that, I mean, they have to impact conversions first and foremost, and they need to also impact traffic. And I consider conversions a direct channel, and indirect would be traffic in this case. Because again, you could be driving a lot of traffic to your domain or to your various web pages, but that doesn't always translate into a dollar amount or to conversions. And so again, that is where you really need, and I'll discuss this later in my presentation, but that's the linchpin to your success. If you can, even if it's back of the envelope math, and even if you have a structure in place that sort of assigns a value amount to to organic traffic, you really need to boil that down at the click level, at the session level, and then that will help anyone who you can get their ear, that will help them understand like the value of one click through the organic channel, what is the dollar value? And so this is, again, goes back to my earlier point. Once you have sort of the channels or the ways you want to sort of get in, you should also consider some of the loopholes. So, and I've seen this, again, in various positions in-house, where maybe you're doing a BI or a tool upgrade, or maybe you're redoing Google Analytics, or you're upgrading that. Those are great opportunities to get in and have SEO priorities sort of considered. Access to GTM tagging, CMS upgrades are a great way to get SEO at the table and get that sort of stakeholder buy-in, and especially making the case, again, the revenue impact for one click, and if the CMS can, again, improve that experience and drive one extra click, how much more valuable is that? And so, and also design overhauls. Again, UX and SEO, I think is sort of the future of where SEO is going. Again, as the core web vitals become more important, that experience and how, again, Google raters and searchers sort of understand and digest your website are going to become more and more impactful in terms of organic revenue and organic traffic. And then also accessibility issues. I've many times have been able to affect the H1 tag by really going in and making the case that we have some accessibility issues. So these are all just loopholes that I think you could definitely use to get the access you need. And then once you do or you don't get the access you need, I really recommend that you begin an aggressive reporting cadence. And I think this is really important, and make sure that you have everyone that you think is relevant to getting you more budget, more access, and being able to prioritize SEO. Because again, this reporting cadence is all about celebrating every single little win that you can. And it should be as detailed as possible. You don't want to make it too mind-numbing. You don't want to melt anyone's brain, but you definitely want to catalog every success. And more importantly, you want to stress, how much more impactful the traffic or revenue could be if you had buy-in from, say, a certain team, or if you had more backing or budget, so that you could really push this amazing project that you've already sort of pitched, but no one seems to be able to give you the backing to implement it. And so what you want to do is you want to start this weekly, and then you want to move it and make sure you get it on a bi-weekly schedule, because again, once you hit them on a weekly report, you want to slow down after about, I would say, 60 days, slow down, and then go bi-weekly, and then go monthly. And then I'll talk about this later, but also use quarterly and annual retrospectives to basically point out what could have happened, what should have happened had you had the buy-in and the tactics and the budget that you needed. And again, like I said before, you don't ever waste an opportunity to continue to make the case for SEO. And so on top of the quarterly and annual reviews, make sure that you're doing a retrospective, both quarterly and annually, to really drive home the fact that you drove X, you could have driven Y if you had buy-in from team A, B, and C. And I would say don't be afraid to name names if you have to, especially on these broader sort of quarterly or annual reports, where you're going to have more eyeballs and visibility around what you're reporting. And so if, say, the content team didn't have the capacity, the resourcing, or you didn't have a ring-fenced resource on the dev team, really make the case of what that extra resource could have done and how much more it could have impacted SEO traffic. And then this is a great tactic, and I will attribute this to Eli. But don't be afraid to share your budget. So if you can make the offer to provide some SEO budget to maybe help the content team or the dev team get an extra resource that could actually help you drive things, that's always a great olive branch, I've found, to build consensus and sort of get the happy vibes going cross-functionally. So that is my presentation. I am happy to take any questions, should there be any.
Thank you very much, Stewart. I appreciate you attributing the budget question to me. So there's some great questions. So we'll hold them for the end, and whatever questions don't get answered, everyone on this panel can be found. Semrush will share the contact information, or you can find them online. And with that, are you ready, Jackie? Jackie's going to blow our minds with how to do forecasting in ways you have never seen before.
It's very generous. Thanks.
In my mind.
Okay, cool. So today we're going to do a little bit chat about SEO forecasting in the enterprise. So for those of you guys that don't know me, my name is Jackie. You can find me on Twitter as Jackie C. Chu. And I'm currently the global SEO lead of intelligence at Uber. That's just a really fancy, verbose way of saying that my team handles all of the data projects, as well as the bespoke analytics and tooling for the SEO teams globally. But prior to that, I was the senior SEO and ASO manager at Square, the SEO and ASO lead at Dropbox, very briefly an SEO consultant for Yahoo magazines, and also have been an SEO manager at many publishing companies. And so, these are quick little snappy chats, so we're not going to get too deep into everything. But today I want to cover the basics of forecasting and also walk you through some potential scenarios in forecasting. So things like trying to figure out your baseline, looking at project-based forecasting, also looking at a kind of more broad sweeping universe or opportunity-based forecasting, and hopefully leave you guys with some last tips. So first off, I just kind of want to anchor this conversation. Let's be honest, forecasting sucks. If you feel bad about it, I actually think this is a very good thing, because it means that you're an honest person. You want to, feel good about numbers you put on a piece of paper. I think that's a great trait. And the reality is it just feels like more art than science most of the time. So, just got to build a bridge and get over it. There are three kind of guiding principles I like to make all of my forecasts. So one, you have to know all forecasts should hopefully be based on historical trends. Every company has seasonality, countries have different major holidays. Without at least a year of historical data, I mean, really ideally 2 years of historical data to back up those trends, if you can sympathize with the fact that there's this thing called COVID going around that might ruin your 2020 data. The reality is you're really just shooting in the dark because you don't have those historical trends. It should also be defendable. In big companies, forecasting is really a prioritization exercise. It's prioritization of money, prioritization of headcount, prioritization of engineering hours. So you just have to be able to defend your forecast and have some kind of logical reason as to why you came up with this number. Generally speaking, saying each of your projects is just going to this is definitely going to be $1 million. This one's going to be a flat $1 million. This one's going to be a flat $1 million. That is going to raise a lot of questions. And it should also be achievable. I think that goals should be uncomfortable, but they shouldn't be unrealistic. Funding numbers might be good initially because you're probably going to get funded, but you're going to lose a lot of trust in your partners. So always try to take a step back and be does this make me uncomfortable, but is it still achievable? So kind of one of the most trying things to do is establishing a baseline. So a baseline is really just what do you think would have happened had you have had no interference, no SEO activities? It's particularly common in high growth companies. And the reason why is because they have already experienced serendipitous growth year over year organically, probably due largely to an increase in brand search. And so a lot of times you're going to be asked to actually discount your SEO efforts to account for growth that would have happened if you did nothing. And pretty much every company I've ever been in, they'll look at their year over year data and say, hey, we've been growing year over year, even without an SEO team. We are not convinced that you guys could actually add to this. And this is a really good tactic for establishing that baseline with fairly high vigor. So I want to talk about a little programming language called R. So R is a statistical programming language. It's a very common language for analysts to use after they have mastered SQL. A lot of times they'll kind of go into R. I think more recent years are kind of more picking up Python so they can eventually move into a data science route. But it's really great for manipulating data, visualizing that data. If you look on the right, this is a really popular R package called Causal Impact. You might recognize it from most A/B testing that a lot of large scale enterprises do. Things like Etsy, I believe Pinterest also has an article on this. If you've ever used Distilled's ODN, a tool, that's also something that actually relies on this R package Causal Impact, actually the first version of ODN. So there's a lot of really cool things you can do with R. And in my opinion, it's honestly a lot more approachable than Python. And so here are a few examples of things you can do with R. The reality is it's also been around for a lot longer than Python. So there's a lot of really cool packages. This is just like a few examples that are kind of relevant to SEO. You can use it to measure A/B tests, use it for scatter plots to understand, what is the best page types for GB versus traffic. You can also use it to forecast things, which is kind of the whole premise of this talk. Okay, so basic steps. You want to download R. You want to then download RStudio. This is pretty much your interface in which you upload the data and you plot the data and where the data is exported, kind of like Terminal, but for R. And then you want to clean and get your data points. The more, the better. Again, you want to have at least a year of data, but really, for any kind of forecast, you're going to want like several years of data, ideally. And then next, you want to use Facebook's Profit package. So Profit is an open source package created by Facebook. It's also available in Python if you're like a heavy Python user, but I just use it in R. And again, it's open source, all free. All these things are free. So it's actually very simple. It seems very scary, but like honestly, all you really need to do is clean your data. Probably the two most important things is that your data is in the right format. So that's like YYY, month, and then date. And then you have a Y column. So this column can really be anything, could be dollars, but in the SEO world, probably the thing that makes the most sense is going to be like some numerical value, probably sessions. So then once you run that through the package, what you end up getting is actually two different kinds of outputs. So one is visual, which will show you kind of like this banded view you guys can see here in this blue. This is kind of the forecast that's going out, and like these little black dots up here are like kind of like outliers. But for the most part, the model is pretty good. And then it'll actually forecast the trends going forward in this section over here. And you'll actually see these bands, like these like higher and lower bands in the output. So this is a really great package for establishing any kind of baseline that kind of removes your own bias from the calculation. But there are some things I want to warn you about. So first off, you want to be careful. Again, if you have bad, unreliable data or data inconsistent with traditional trends, again, there's this thing called COVID going around. This program is going to exaggerate it, and it'll actually make it a lot worse. So after you kind of like plug in your data points and it spits out something, you really have to take a step back and say like, hey, is this believable? Do I believe this is going to happen? Because the reality is, if you do not have reliable historical data, then the forecast is only as good as the data, and the program can only use that data that you're inputting. So yes, this works best when you have years of historical data that you like kind of trust. And if you really like nerdy stuff like this, I highly recommend you guys follow Chris. His Twitter is Chris Yee, but spelled backwards. That's why it's EEYSIRHC. Everything I know in R is pretty much learned from Chris. So he's super smart. Follow him on Twitter. So the second thing we talk about is project-based. This is kind of more traditional SEO forecasting. I tend to do project-based forecasting when there's like a really clear group of keywords that I really want to own. So for example, that's like things like point of sale for Square, or like we had like an Apple Pay kind of like beat for a while, or like cloud storage for Dropbox. Like we just need to like own this category. This is like our jam. So the basic steps is you want to plan out your keyword strategy, both head terms and supporting long tail content. Next, you want to figure out what is your current average ranking position for those keywords. And then lastly, you want to identify where you should be able to rank based off of your domain strength. Okay, so kind of like a very high level overview. You on the first step, you're identifying your keywords that you're going to target and what is your current rank for them. You kind of average those out. And then you actually figure out like, okay, for the people who are ranking for like my head terms, in this case, like let's say keto snacks, like what is their domain authority and like what is my domain authority? For simplicity, I just really like just looking at the head term. So there's like no, complicated maths going on by any means. And I just basically plot my domain authority versus their domain authority. And I look at like the top few people who are ranking, like the top 3 positions, and then see like what am I ranking? And this kind of gives me a very, very, very loose, rough swag of where I think I could realistically end up based on, if my SEO recommendations are implemented properly, like what is the happy case? So in this case, I can see like, okay, hey, this is interesting, even though I rank number 2 for this head term, I actually have a much higher domain authority. I have like 97. Wow, it must be like Wikipedia or something. But site number 1 only has a 91. I actually think we could beat that. I think we could be number 1. So in this case, if I was to be number 1, I would get an incremental like 2,000 sessions just using like a basic click-through rate curve. So that you basically build a forecast off of the happy scenario. If you want, it's always good to like discount things a little bit just because don't want to be too ambitious. There's a lot of like other rich snippets that show up that can steal your clicks. But this is just a very, very, very basic keyword level forecast. And again, total oversimplification of how you rank. Can you even achieve this keyword? Is it related to the entity of your business? But it is really defendable, and it's usually roughly fairly accurate if it's a keyword that actually is contextually relevant to what you actually do, and if you don't have like a super bad reputation in it. So again, oversimplification, but good for a category you want to own, where you have like a very, very, very clear goal and you really need to like own the space. And there are a few ways to add more rigor to this. Understanding your own non-brand click-through rate curve. You can use a generic non-brand click-through rate curve by doing a quick Google search. You can also warehouse your own Search Console data, label all the clicks that come in from non-brand, build your own click-through rate curve so you can like truly know what is your click-through rate for positions 1 through 10. Probably not necessary, honestly, but that's an option. You also can factor in the presence and volatility of rich features. Again, if you're ranking for them, maybe you don't need to do this, but if you're not ranking for them, maybe you need to soften your forecast. You can also use tools like Semrush or Google Trends API to understand, what is the current trends of this keyword. Is it growing? Is it dying? And you can also do this exercise at the keyword level if you want to accommodate some keywords that are worth more to you in search or that you rank higher on, since I kind of like aggregated everything together for simplicity. But again, most of these are dampeners. And the last way you can kind of forecast is universe-based. So this is probably the most simple out of all of them. So basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to identify what is the opportunity of this project. It's usually used for very, very, very large projects. Let's say you want to build out a completely new section of your site, or you want to build out like a Yelp-like aggregator. And so, it's really difficult to actually look at all the keywords they're ranking for that's non-brand and be like, hey, like I'm going to do an individual keyword level forecast for like all those keywords. It would be literally impossible. It'd be kind of a fool's errand. So like skyscrapering, it's a very favorite SEO tactic. Basically what you would do is you identify a site that already owns the space. So it does require you to have already a player in the space that can be a good proxy for gauging, this very large opportunity. So in this case, let's say I want to make a review aggregator. I would choose like a Yelp or TripAdvisor. This is a really low effort, but of course not as defensible way to forecast future growth, but is really good from a opportunity perspective. So what are some basic steps? So first you identify a site that already owns the space. And then you can use a third-party tool like Semrush to remove all the branded traffic. So just be sure that you remove everything from like misspellings to, you're probably gonna have to export it to do this, but you can take that Semrush export, you remove things like misspellings of different languages of that brand, as well if that brand is an international company, to remove as much branded traffic as you can. And then you can kind of get a rough swag of, what is their branded traffic. And then you should decide on like, what is a feasible percentage of the traffic you want to own? Maybe it's 100% of the traffic. That is a very, very ambitious forecast that would involve a multi-year, but maybe, we want to own 2%. For the first year is a good ambitious goal. And you can back that into a long-term, sometimes multi-year forecast. And again, this is probably the most loose one that you'll ever do, but it's really good from getting a really large, like kind of like swing for the fences kind of idea. If you guys ever have something like that, to say like, hey, this is a very real, like valid opportunity. And at the end of the day, that's really what you're just trying to understand. Like, what is the opportunity here? And what is the trade-offs we're making? So for our last tips on forecasting, just forecasts are more art than science. Again, the goal is to have a defensible reason as to why you think this is going to happen. Think about this as a prioritization exercise, not a promise, because the reality is you're really just prioritizing things. Everyone knows that you can't really predict the future. And if possible, suggest an optimistic and pessimistic forecast. I really like this because it just kind of shows like, hey, look, there's a lot of variance, a lot of variables that can happen. For me, this is happy path, but again, just kind of depends on your company and what is going to fly. So that's it. Bailey would like you to follow me on Twitter. Again, Jackie C. on Twitter. That's all.
Thank you, Jackie. If we could vote right now, I'm sure people would agree that they just downloaded R, and this is what they're going to mess with.
It's free. It's free. You can't break anything. Just do it.
So,
Nothing. I'm sorry.
This is great. No, this is my favorite part of in-house SEO. Is like this can be a part of your job. Like when you're like at an agency and you're not in-house, like your job is deliverables, and when you're in-house, like I'm sure you spent weeks on learning this, and then you shared it internally, and people were like, "Jackie, you're so smart. This is amazing. Share more of it." And you're just like, "Well, it was fun." So like, that's what I love about in-house. Again, it's the long game. This is great. And now we'll close out the Upasna talking about a product management mindset, which will hopefully tie all this together and help you level up and really grow your career. Because it's like, as Jackie walked through her background, and Stewart, you forgot. So Stewart, you're gonna have to come around and tell us all your career. But as Jackie showed her background, she's been a few different places. So like again, it's the long game. It's your life, it's your career, it's growing in SEO, not just like growing on a single keyword. So let's turn it over to Upasna.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eli. 1 second here, guys. All right. Okay, so yeah, definitely teed this up so great for me. Thank you, Stewart and Jackie. I'm going to be reiterating and re-emphasizing several points that they made as well. So we're going to talk about the product management mindset for success today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Upasna. I'm a product manager at CNN, and I lead the digital news and platform product team as well as the e-commerce team. I've been there for about 2 years. Prior to that, I was an SEO for about 11 years, primarily working in-house in news publishing and several Fortune 500s, again, heavily on the technical SEO side. I'm also a speaker coach at Shine Bootcamp and a mentor at Girls Who Code. And on the side, I'm also a mindfulness and meditation teacher. Okay, so today we're going to cover some basic product management principles and what the core of product management is, and then get into the soft skills that really encompass that product management mindset. And then most importantly, want to leave you all with how you can embody that product mindset to become the PM of your own domain. So product management, company by company, organization by organization, is wildly different. However, at its core, it is the intersection of user experience, technology, and business. And the product manager serves as the team captain that rallies these teams together to focus on a single mission. Of course, I had to create a roadmap because I'm a product manager. So this is essentially the culmination of product management responsibilities. These are things, no matter which discipline you're in, you have the ability to develop and create roadmaps for yourself. So first and foremost, product managers are responsible for discovery and validating the concept. Jackie touched on this a little bit in terms of defending, and this is a very similar principle of validating every single thing that you recommend. From there, only do you start getting into gathering things like technical and functional requirements to build a definition of what you're proposing and recommending. Then product managers collaborate with engineers and delivery managers to actually build the minimum viable product. And then go into a launch process where we assess performance and optimize. And then I actually should have made this a circle and not a roadmap now that I think about it, but it's iterate, rinse, and repeat. Product managers sometimes are called mini CEOs if you are very heavy into the product management industry jargon, but I very vehemently disagree with that because you have to be able to influence without authority, and we're going to get into that in a second. But if there are three personas or kind of roles of a product manager, I believe that is that they are problem solvers, team captains, and sometimes you got to be the janitor. The good thing is that product management is a practice, and its practitioners come from a wide variety of industries. My product management team at CNN comes from engineering, business, journalism, SEO, design, and content strategy. And because product management is a mindset, you have the ability to be the product manager of your own domain. So by developing and embodying some really desirable and effective qualities, you'll also get a seat at the table of really important conversations. I know when I sat on the other side of the conversation as an outsider of SEO, wanting to get into those conversations with product and engineering, I was able to understand slowly over time kind of what enabled me to slowly get to that point, to get a seat at the table, not only to be a great SEO, but also to be a great leader. And as Eli mentioned, this isn't just about doing great SEO work. It's really about becoming a great leader so you can advance the trajectory of your career as well. The product management mindset isn't reserved exclusively for product managers. Adopting this will allow you to bring even more value to your customers and find opportunity for growth for yourself along the way. So here are my 5 favorite and what I believe to be the most important attributes of the product management mindset. First, curiosity. Second is a sense of ownership. Third is a deep sense of critical thinking. Fourth is effective communication. And this is probably not in the way that you think it is, or it's been historically explained. And last but not least is empathy. And we'll dive into each one of these in a little more detail here. So first and foremost, Curiosity and the willingness to get to the absolute root cause of a problem is a key trait of all great product leaders and product managers. We have this relentless understanding or a relentless want to understand the why, and we continuously ask questions to zero in on the problem, never satisfied with face value answers, and always seeking opportunities to talk directly with our customer. At the core of this, there's this desire to always be learning and always be understanding better. Second is the sense of ownership. I mentioned before that product managers have to be able to influence without authority. That's because you don't have a fancy title like a director or a C-suite, but the product manager is responsible for the quality of every decision that's being made. With that being said, you need to be very okay with taking responsibility for the team's failure, and also really okay with not getting any credit for anything. That takes a lot of grit, and you don't kind of wait for others to take the lead. You are the one that's at the first line of defense for all communication, all conversation that occurs, and you serve as a team captain, like I mentioned before. That's where that sense of ownership really comes out. You stay firm on goals, but flexible on the process. And if there's one takeaway out of this slide that you get, is that you are a ruthless prioritizer. I'm going to touch on that in a little more detail and probably repeat it 700 more times. But third is critical thinking. Product managers dive deep into understanding why the problem is a problem through thorough analytical examination. We're super comfortable with knowing what we do know and don't know, and able to make sound decisions, even if there is ambiguity around what we don't know. And if there is an unknown, or there is lots of unknown, we're able to facilitate conversations to get the answers to get the job done. This requires collaboration and understanding reasoning from all parties involved. This also takes a really high level of effective communication. Mostly when people talk about effective communication, we tend to kind of default think to being clear in the way we articulate or delivering value in our insights through data. But while those are super important as a product manager and on the path to becoming a leader, it is of utmost importance to listen to understand and not respond. And while doing that, move seamlessly through teams like engineering and design and user experience and business and finance to deliver impactful messages. Being able to converse in the language of the listener, it's what's going to get you the seat at the table. Focus on goals and outcomes. We'll touch on that in a little more detail as well. And be able to smartly repeat and over-communicate your messages in that impactful way. The best way to go about this mindset shift is to think like a teacher. I know from being an SEO for 10 years and now being on the other side of the fence that there's a lot of assumptions and expectations that SEOs go into conversations with, assuming that product managers or engineers or your finance and business people should just know. No, they don't, and no, they don't need to. And it's your job to educate and inform them. And when you go in with that kind of egoless mindset and just coming in to teach and focus on how you're delivering value, that is the key thing that's going to get you a seat at the table and keep getting invitations back to it. This leads me to my last but not least highly desirable attribute of a product manager is empathy. You have a high level of self-awareness and you're not afraid of vulnerability and showing up to say, I really messed this up and here's how we're going to do it better. That is not an easy place to get to. You have to be really okay with owning, again, that quality of the decision. And the good thing is that you can do this by just being a really keen observer. It goes back to what I mentioned before about listening to listen and not to respond. Be able to turn insights into action from that observation, and then shorten all the feedback loops between the different teams that you communicate with, and regularly talk to your customers. Here's how to put that product mindset into practice and get a seat at the table. We covered those 5 kind of soft skills and highly desirable attributes. And the thing is, it's not going to be where you wake up one day and you have them. It takes really deep self-awareness and shifting the way you think at work, and kind of reprogramming the way you've done things before. The good thing is that it's easy to kind of observe and watch leaders in the space who do this and kind of just repeat and do what they're doing and see ones that are successful and bring in those practices to your own. One of the most important values is to think in outcomes and not output. Do not provide laundry lists of prescriptive tasks to your engineers and product managers. When I say laundry list, I mean that 75-page SEO audit that has 100 recommendations in it. Think deeply and clearly about how you are providing value and what problem you're solving. And not what problem you're solving for yourself or for SEO. What problem are you solving for the business and most importantly, for the user? Saying that adding a title tag is going to improve SEO is not a problem to be solved. Talking about how it'll help the user and bring them to content that they really need because you've done the user experience research before and you know that that's a gap. That's where you define problems and that's where you bring in value. Engage your teammates to bring the best ideas to life by facilitating conversations that focus on solving the same problem while using resources effectively. This is why I said just in that previous bullet point that adding or optimizing meta tags isn't solving an actual user problem. It's helping Google, who is one user, but your end user is the consumer of the content. And that is how you need to frame these conversations. Be passionate about the problem and not the solutions. Be on the same page as your business people, your product people, and your engineers. What matters is whether your deliveries are impacting user behavior, which in turn impacts product indicators. This is where SEO falls in, and which in turn absolutely should impact business indicators, AKA money. Validate every single one of your recommendations. Don't even go into a conversation with with the product manager or an engineer if you don't have validation behind your recommendation. Every single one. And again, don't assume or expect people to know what you're talking about. Here are 4 elements that you can use to validate your findings and your recommendations. 1 is value. What problem are you solving? Rank the priority of problems to be solved. If everything is a priority, then nothing is a priority. And I can't emphasize that enough. I would emphasize it more if I had more time. So I'm going to leave it there for now. Second is feasibility. What are the technical limitations? How can you build on it over time? This requires a great relationship and an open conversation over time with your engineering team. Third is validation based off of usability. What are the deal breakers and the blockers, and what minimum usability requirements do you need to meet in order to provide value to justify your work? Again, that goes into how you rank and prioritize the problems and the solutions that you're providing. And last but not least is to validate off of business viability. How is this profitable? How can you get the necessary partners on board to make this profitable? Okay, I guess I am going to say it again, because last but not least is ruthless prioritization as a core fundamental of product management and the mindset. Remember, if everything is a priority, then nothing is a priority. Don't get distracted by lists and tasks. This just glorifies outputs, and you want to prioritize based on what will deliver the greatest outcomes. Make no your favorite word. Stay firm on goals, but flexible on the process. You might know exactly what you need to do, but be flexible on how to get there, because you'll be talking to your engineers and your product people and your business folks, and you'll learn as you go along the way, and you're not always going to be right, and that's totally okay. My favorite model to use for prioritization is the RICE model. This evaluates reach, impact, confidence, and effort, and then you get a RICE score based on that formula. Use that score to stack rank at all of your recommendations. Again, especially when it comes to a huge SEO audit or a list of recommendations, use the RICE model to prioritize it. And last but not least is to deliver and communicate value. How do we do that? I love this 3-part formula. I've been using this for the last 10 years since my first boss in SEO told me about it. And it's that every time you have a conversation, you should be delivering, every time you have a conversation with a stakeholder, especially, you should be delivering an observation, an insight, and a key takeaway. Whether this is written communication, whether it's in a meeting, whether it's in a presentation, in a slide format, think about what the problem is. This is what you're observing. This is the observation. Second are the insights that are informed by data. This provides the context for the observation. And last but not least are the key takeaways. These are the tactical next steps you and your partners need to take to go and achieve the next goal. Thank you so much. And I wish I had so much more time to talk about this, but happy to answer any more questions that you all have.
That was incredible, Upasna. Thank you. And you should like have a commercial for my book, like talking about product, and then I have product led SEO. Okay, I want to dive right into questions, and I want to call out something that no one mentioned. Actually, there was one mentioned. Upasna used the word. So we've been talking now for 46 minutes, and Upasna is the only one that used the word Google. So we're talking about SEO, and no one said the word Google because this is all like externally focused on the customer user and internally focused on stakeholders. So my mind is blown. Like, I don't think I've ever seen this long of a presentation on SEO without talking about Google, because Google's not our stakeholder. So with that, I want to jump in to our first question, which is almost a rhetorical question. So we'll just go around the horn and ask everyone. I'll start with Upasna first. How do you even think of algorithm updates? Like, do you talk about algorithm updates internally?
No, I don't. I love to read about it and know about them still as a product manager, but we do have a very dedicated and great SEO team who handles that deep, detailed information. But also we know on the product side that, and Stewart touched on this beautifully, is that it's all about user experience. And we believe in, like, our mantra for product is defend the user experience at CNN. And so, SEO, great SEO is a byproduct of that. So no, I don't really spend much time on it.
Jackie?
I am not personally concerned about most updates. I think for the most part, unless you are doing something that in your heart of hearts is like not defensible, and if you'd be embarrassed for John Mew on Twitter to like stumble upon it, then you're probably fine. I mean, most of these updates really affect kind of like more of like the local SEO space, or like, much smaller players. Oh, and I've never really worried about like backlink strategies, etc. I mean, even this Core Web Vitals update, I'm like, meh on. I just think that it's, for the most part, like, they're not gonna, if you're the best product, right? If you're like Square in your point of sale, and somebody else is like a much worse product and has like much worse signals and has like a bad online reputation, but their site maybe runs like a little bit faster on mobile than yours, like, Google's not going to rank that person higher. That doesn't really make sense. And so, yeah, I think you should know if it can affect you, right? Because Google historically has rolled out updates that can and have affected large sites of scale, and they continue to, right? Like, what is it? Daily Mail right now is not having a very good time. But the reality is, it's like, you should know where you actually truthfully stand in comparison to your competitors. And then it's your job as in-house SEO to explain, like, if you're not the best person, like, why is that? What's it going to take? What's the investment that you need to be that, best in class experience, as Stewart was mentioning?
Yeah, I think for me, it depends. The classic SEO answer, right? I have been in situations where an algo update did seriously impact the business, but I will use that as sort of an opportunity, either the carrot or the stick, usually the stick, in terms of like, I told you so, in the sense that, look, the algorithm now is preferring, say, rich content or deeper content, smaller players with better backlink profiles, and we don't have that. And if we had done X, Y, and Z, again, that's when the only time I would bring up an algo update. Like, otherwise, as Jackie and Upasna have said, that look, it's not going to affect my day to day, but sometimes it does. And when it does, I'm not going to be afraid to sort of leverage that as an opportunity to, again, get more buy-in and get what I need for the team.
And as Stewart knows at SurveyMonkey, so your stakeholders, your internal stakeholders, sometimes they have an old-fashioned approach to SEO. So like, we're doing something different. We're working with product managers, working with engineers, working with designers, but maybe like the C-suite, they only care about rankings and they don't really get granular. They just want to know where they are. So at SurveyMonkey, what we would do is we would talk about algorithm updates after they happened and point out how we benefited from them. Because really, when you're at a brand, and if you're at an in-house SEO right now and you're not at a brand, your goal is to be building it into a brand. When you're at a brand, you're benefiting from algo updates because the people that are faking brands are the ones that Google's out to root out from the index and they shouldn't be ranking. So most likely you'll benefit. If you don't, then you didn't, like exactly like Jackie said, then you didn't deserve to benefit.
That's my favorite thing about working at big companies. It's that you're not faking the signals. You're making them more clear. And that's totally different than what a lot of like smaller scale SEOs do. Yeah.
Exactly. And I will just say one more thing about the algo updates. Those tend to become very newsworthy events that then like members of the C-suite like pick up in their news feeds. And so inevitably you'll get the, hey, should we be worried about this Slack message? So, and then that's where you should definitely have an answer, whether that's, hey, yeah, no worries, we've got that under control, or again, you know what? We might have some issues. So.
All right. I want to jump to a question we have from the chat from Dakota. Dakota asked about SEO tasks that she should do to accomplish everyday week. And it sounds like Dakota might have multiple focuses within her day job. So if there are tasks, and I know the panelists today were not task oriented, we were strategic, but like, what are some tactics that we could do to like impress upon people and grow organic traffic? So Stewart spoke last. We'll start with you.
Well, that's a tough one. Only in the sense that it's only tough because like I hate to sort of recommend the tactics that you should pursue if you really don't have a through line to push them through, right? Like, so, whether it's page titles, whether it's metadata optimization, body content, backlinking profiles, it's, again, if you have the through line and you have the wherewithal to affect those, again, we can stack rank like what's the most impactful meta tag to update and optimize, and is it more important than the body content? Which I would say no, the body content's more important. But yeah, again, it depends on what you have access to. That's how I would start to prioritize your tactics.
Upasna?
Yeah, I love this conversation. I could talk about it all day. I would start talking to your stakeholders about prioritization and the importance of it. And again, I love the RICE model. It works really well for very granular technical things, especially. And again, it's a 4-part model. I've done it myself when I was an SEO, and I continue to use it now as well in product. And also if they're tying each one, like once you get the score out of this stack ranked list of your RICE model prioritization, attach every single one to an OKR. You're in-house, you very likely are responsible for a set of OKRs or responsible for work that feeds up into OKRs. And if you don't know what those are, I would take a pause and make yourself very, very aware and well educated on what they are, because conversating in that language of OKRs, tying that into your prioritization, that's what's going to, well, also it's going to make you look great, because it'll make you sound like, you are able to understand high level goals of the company and you're attaching your value to the company goals. So I would start there. Make sure you're super well versed on OKRs, use the RICE model to prioritize, attach the two, and start forcing the conversation of priority.
Jackie?
Yeah, this is where I'm going to default to it depends, because I think it really just depends on what is the opportunity and what is the risk, depending on like the size of your company. If you're a small company and you guys are just like wearing many hats and you just want to test if some content is going to rank, I think that makes sense to kind of like prioritize highly if it's like a major head term. However, if you are in a larger company, usually your biggest wins can really be found through like, changing the IA, doing like an internal linking strategy. There's like heavy site migrations. That's very high risk. And that's probably not something that I would want to try to learn how to do myself without any support. This is actually literally one of the main reasons why people start building SEO teams. It's they're like, hey, we have new migration, new brand, new CMO, and then they do that migration and they literally just lose everything. So it can be a really big risk. So it depends on like what kind of projects you have in that pipeline and what you think the opportunity is. If it's small, then I would just like try to tackle it myself. But again, if it's something that is high risk, would really, really highly suggest finding, a smaller agency or someone to support you. Because you can literally wipe out the traffic on your site, depending on what's in your backlog.
Love it. Okay. So we have 4 minutes left. I want to do a lightning round on 2 questions. One is, what are you guys doing about page experience update? I think it could be a very short answer. Jackie.
There is a concept of like CYA, which is cover your, what's. So we are like monitoring that data and we're warehousing that data internally and also like looking at competitors, but I am not losing sleep over passing those thresholds. I think the most important thing is that you're faster than your competitors.
Upasna, I don't know if this is something you deal with.
Can you repeat the question? I'm so sorry.
So Google has their page experience update with Core Web Vitals and all the stuff everyone's getting scared about and blogging about and tweeting about.
Yeah, it's embedded into our entire product practice, right? Like with user research, with user experience, the way we do product design. SEO also moved under product in our organization as well. And so all of Core Web Vitals to me is user experience. That's what it is at the technical, strategic and strategic level. And so I think just understanding that at a high level and then going granular and kind of delineating across teams, like, okay, this set of core vitals might be most appropriate for like a product designer to tackle, or this might be for, engineering to handle, like just delineating responsibilities across that. But 100%, it is user experience at its core and how it displays to the end user.
And Stewart?
Yeah, I mean, it's very rare that Google will tell you what it's going to sort of throw into its ranking factor soup mix, so to speak. So yeah, I took it seriously when they came out with the announcement like last year, and so I got ahead of this and basically started creating tickets and bringing stakeholders from the dev and design teams together and saying, hey, this is going to become a ranking factor, as Google has stated, and that doesn't happen very often, so we should take it very seriously. And so I've got that cadence sort of in place as we move. Well, it was supposed to be May, now maybe it's going to be June. But yeah, I think anytime that Google says it's going to consider something a very important ranking factor, you should probably pay attention and not necessarily freak out, but just at least make sure you're addressing it and making sure that you have cross-functional awareness that, hey, this is going to matter and we may need to sort of triage certain issues as they come up.
Yeah, from my experience, I find that this is something agencies focus on a lot because it's really the only red, yellow, green metric they can say, hire us, we'll fix it for you. But like internally, I've had the conversations like, you need to speed up the pages, and like, well, what do you want us to do? Like, get another data center? Like, it is what it is. Should we spend millions of dollars on this? And will we get millions of dollars in return? So I think this brings us into our last lightning round question before we share how everyone can contact us. There's some great questions that were asked that we didn't get to, which is, I'll start with you, Upasna, because we didn't start with you at all. Do brands have an edge in SEO, and a very short why?
Yes, and it depends how big your brand is, of course. I know this firsthand because we kicked up an e-commerce practice at CNN, and I was the first product manager to start it. And we saw a lot of initial success surely because of our brand. And then now we're in the phase of rapid growth where we need to scale, be able to scale. And so, yes, it's a period.
Jackie?
Yes, too. Just because, again, SEO, people think SEO is so nebulous, but the reality is if you do things right, SEO usually works. And being worthy of ranking and having like really truly a competitive product is definitely the way to be doing SEO and to be doing it right.
And Stewart?
Yeah, brand matters. Google loves brands. There, I mentioned Google. And the more authoritative or quote unquote popular your brand is, I think the better you're going to perform. And yeah.
Well, I'll just close out with my opinion on that, which is I think users like brands. So users trust CNN for news and Uber or Lyft for more than taxis and Workato for workplace tools. And Google wants to give what users want. And they're not just going to be like, well, I'm going to give you whoever was able to secure the best backlinks or write the longest piece of content or have the prettiest images. That they give users what they're looking for, which is why we find when like big brands get penalized, it's like a slight slap on the wrist because, you know, people will think that there's something wrong with Google if they can't find, and like there are great examples like years ago, JCPenney, and I think BMW got penalized. Like if they can't find BMW and JCPenney in Google and they can find it in Bing, they think Google's broken, not those brands. So with that, my mind is blown. I learned a ton. I'm so glad we were able to do this. Thank you so much, Semrush, for hosting us. I think everyone can get it. The contact information is going to be shared. This video is permanent and everyone can revisit it. And thank you everyone for attending.